first session, we focused on what is conflict, what is our relationship to conflict. Again, conflict in an interpersonal context, at least, is this interpretation of incompatible difference or threat. So really conflict is a result of what we make an interaction with someone else mean. So when I'm interacting with you and you're sharing with me, somehow I interpret that interaction as being evidence of this incompatible difference. In other words, and very strongly held differences of opinion, and strongly held differences of opinion sufficient that we feel threatened by that. I'm threatened by what you're saying, how you're saying it. So really that's that sort of foundational piece of what conflict is in that context. We talked about the context in which we engage conflict, which is conversation. So we talked a bit about conversational structures that support or inhibit our ability to engage in conflict effectively. So that was basically where we covered our first session. I was coming back and just highlighting a couple things from that session. And I've said this a number of times, but I'm going to repeat it just because I think it's important. I think people often ask, okay, how do I get better at doing this thing? How do I get better at being with conflict? And of course, one of the ways of getting better with conflict is just recognizing when you're in it and recognizing what you're doing. You're increasing your self-awareness and recognizing that your responses in conflict are not dependent on what other people do. It's how you choose to respond. And I think, one of my favorite quotes comes from Viktor Frankl is, in between stimulus and response is choice. And in every situation, we have a choice. And we're going to talk about that a little bit tonight, and recognizing I may not like my choices, but I've got choices. And so in a situation, how I choose to respond and my ability to choose is based on my awareness that I am at a choice point. And we introduced that in the first session, we introduced that conversational structural model, which says that as a conversation unfolds, we reach choice points. The first choice point, do I go to defending myself because I'm feeling threatened, or do I suspend judgment and engage in more of dialogue? And then the second piece I would focus on is that I tell people is that if you want to get better at dealing with conflict, get curious. Because conflict is usually not about what you think it's about. One of my favorite quotes is, and I don't know if I shared this with you, I can't remember because I talked to lots of people, but I heard this from an instructor in a course I took in Canada, was that your goal is to shift from judgment and fear to curiosity and compassion. How do I shift my way of being in the face of conflict from judgment and fear? Judgment usually leads to I'm right and you're wrong, driven by a fear that you're posing a threat to me. And how do I shift from that to being curious and compassionate, respectful? And I just think that's again, shifting not just what you're doing in engaging conflict, but who are choosing to be in engaging conflict. And we'll come back and visit that with the ad integrity piece in a moment. In our second session last week, we talked about, again, if conflict's not about what we think it's about, how do you begin to unpack what it's about? We spent a lot of time looking at two primary models. We looked at the ladder of inference, which from Chris Argyris talks about what does that meaning-making process look like? How do I take observable data? How do I pay attention to certain things and make those certain things mean something, and then adopt beliefs and feelings about you based on what I'm making, what you say, and how I'm interpreting you, what they make that mean, and how quickly that happens. This whole idea that we're creating narratives, we're making meaning all the time. And in conflict, what am I making it mean? I'm right and you're wrong. You're a threat to me. And our behavior goes from there. And why would I be interested in what you have to say if it's wrong? If there's no value, let's focus on what I want to say. So, again, recognizing that meaning-making process we talked about. We talked about the interest-based model. It comes from Fisher and Urey, where conflicts are about issues. Where we often get stuck is where we get stuck on our positions related to those issues. And we spend time focusing on our solution, our interpretation, our way of seeing things. And we defend those positions, and we advocate those positions, and we attack the positions of the other person. And what the interest-based approach says from Fisher and Urey is that, the best you're going to achieve out of that conversation is a compromise. If you really want to break through that, you got to realize that those positions are driven by underlying interests is determined. You're familiar with the language because it's been around long enough. What are the underlying needs, objectives, values that are driving people to take their positions that need to be understood if we're going to move forward? And so that's a primary model that many who work in the conflict engagement, dispute resolution field are taught as a way of facilitating challenging conversations, helping people engage and resolve conflict. So any questions on any of that, or anybody want to reflect on any of that before we move on or ask questions? Okay. So tonight we're going to talk about, okay, how do I do this? I mean, if I understand some of those concepts, what does it look like to have a difficult or challenging conversation? And again, when I talk about conflict, I mean, you can talk about conflict as a construct, but I'm always talking about conflict in the context of a difficult conversation. So when I'm teaching about conflict, I'm always talking about how do you have difficult conversations, because that's really the context in which we're going to navigate, engage whatever the conflict issue is about. So what we're going to focus on tonight is how do you prepare for, initiate, and engage a conversation that will facilitate the effective engagement of that conflict, okay? Now, I just want to clarify, because I'm not sure if I've clarified this in the past. You hear me using the term engaging the conflict, okay? And there's a whole history to that. Suffice it to say that we often talk about conflict resolution, and there are many conflicts that we experience. Remember, I think I did share this. Did I talk about this last week? The idea of, can't remember if I did. Well, I'll just bear with me. I'm sorry. That, there are some conflict a lot of conflict that can be resolved, that we will reach an agreement, we will reach a resolution. We go, oh, that conflict no longer exists. But there is this notion, and I think I did talk about this either the first or the second night, of what's called enduring conflict. And what differentiates enduring conflict from other conflict is enduring conflict is fundamentally not resolvable. It's not resolvable because the system in which the conflict is existing or operating is in some ways designed to maintain the conflict. And a lot of the work that I do is in systems where people are having to deal with enduring conflict. We're not going to resolve it, okay? I think I did share that, the author of this idea is a guy named Dr. Bernie Mayer, and I heard him speak once, and I think I did share this, was that, one of his examples of enduring conflict is marriage. There are times in our marriages that we will find things about which we will not agree. And over the years, we will maybe never agree about those. I think there are, Kathy and I have been married 43 years, and there are things about which we will probably still never agree when we get to 60, whatever that looks like. And so the question isn't, well, then do we just avoid those conflicts? No. The challenge is we have to engage those conflicts, but you engage them not with the goal of resolving them. You engage them with the goal of reaching agreement that allows you to continue to move forward together. The conflict will continue to exist, and yet we will continue to make agreements within the context of that conflict that facilitate our continued ability to work together, live together, begin a relationship moving forward around some mutual purpose that has us coming together, okay? So when I'm talking about conflict, I often talk about creating a structure that facilitates our ability to engage the conflict. And one of the things that he talks about, and a lot of the focus that I do in my work is working with people and saying, if your relationship to conflict is that it's bad, that it has to be fixed and going away, and yet you work in a system that's defined by enduring conflict, you're going to have to change your relationship. You're going to have to learn to be with that conflict in an unresolved form and saying, that's okay. It's a context where we continue to bump up against those issues and have to deal with those issues and engage those issues and learn from those issues and make decisions that have us going forward, fully realizing that issues are going to show up again down the road. A new iteration, a new manifestation of that conflict is going to show up down the road, okay? So what we're going to focus on in our session tonight and we'll focus on this somewhat next week also, is really beginning to look at a process and some steps or phases for engaging conflict and or difficult, challenging conversations. So I want to start, and this is, Jeff, going to go to your question. I want to start by introducing a basic framework. That's when I say basic, I mean this for me is a very fundamental framework that actually shows up in a number of areas of my life. Okay. Jeff mentioned the idea of at integrity or in integrity. I was introduced to this construct a number of years ago. I went through a year-long certification program in leadership coaching. And the instructors introduced us to the distinction between being in or at or out of integrity. My understanding that the construct actually has some of its roots in the old landmark material. If anybody went through any of that landmark training years ago, I think it's still around. But the idea is not whether you have integrity. That's not the question. The question is, are you engaging in or out of integrity? You are said to be operating in or at integrity when your actions and your speaking manifest your commitments. So there's an alignment between what I say I believe, what I say I value, what I'm committed to, and my actions and my speaking. And we call that what? I'm walking my talk, okay? You are said to be out of integrity, not so much lacking integrity, but you're out of integrity when your actions and your speaking don't manifest your commitments, okay? Now, what's important about that in a coaching context is that when you're coaching someone, you're actually coaching someone who has made a commitment to achieve some goal or objective in their life, and your goal is to help them take daily action that will move them towards achieving that commitment, and to help them achieve breakthroughs when they achieve what we call breakdowns. You break down when you find yourself out of integrity with your commitment, then the coach works with you to figure out what's that about and how do we break through that, what's the learning that will keep you moving toward your commitment. But in relationships, when we're out of integrity, what's the cost? Well, fundamentally, the cost is trust. When you're operating, when you say you're committed to one thing and believe certain things and operate out of alignment with that, I'm going, well, I'm not sure I trust you. And as it relates to conflict, let me just give you sort of the classic example where groups I work with are often out of integrity. I mean, almost every group or team that I end up working with is out of integrity in this area. Because almost every team or group I work with states as a core value, we respect and value diversity of opinion. And my response is, yeah, only until it shows up. Because what happens when people share diverse ideas in difficult situations? They often get shot down. Are you kidding? That's the stupidest thing I ever heard. We tried that years ago. That didn't work. Where have you been? Those kinds of things. I was reading Brene Brown, and she was talking to somebody once and this is something she shared in one of her books, where she was talking to a guy who was a very successful entrepreneur, been voted Entrepreneur of the Year by Inc. magazine, very successful business person. And she asked him, she said, Kevin, in your mind, what's the most significant barrier to innovation and creativity? And his response was, I don't know what you call it, but it's people's fear of sharing an idea and being shot down. Because when that happens, what do those people do? You share your idea and you're shot down. What do? You don't share ideas anymore. And you're no longer sharing and contributing to the conversation. Now, if you know much about Brene Brown, putting it in her language, you'd share it's fear of being vulnerable and being shamed. But it happens all the time. I had a person tell me once, I'm never raising my hand in a meeting again. I go, why? What happened? I got crucified. I was totally shot down in front of all my colleagues and peers with the idea that I was sharing. Don't ask me to participate in that and share an idea in the future. Mm-hmm. So when we're engaging in a difficult conversation, engaging in conflict, one of the first questions we want to ask ourselves is, how do we engage this experience at integrity? So before I go on, I want to come back to you, Jeff, and say, does that clarify the distinction there for you? Okay, great. So in order to operate at integrity, I've adopted a sort of a two-question framework that I use in lots of situations that really facilitate my ability to step back and reflect on the ability to engage in integrity. And the two questions are these. The way I used to approach challenging situations, I'm sorry, I'm flipping around there, would be, I would ask the last question. So I sort of I'm a very visual person. So metaphorically, I'm walking down the road of life and a problem drops in front of me, right in front of me. It's just like plops, big boulder drops right in front of me. Okay. And that problem, could be a problem, it could be a conflict, it could be a person, whatever it is. But I'm facing a problem or a conflict or a challenge. And the first question that most of us will ask ourselves in that context is, what do I need to do to fix this problem? Now, I'm saying that's a gross generalization, but that's true of our culture, that we are reinforced for doing and solving problems, for fixing things. So when a problem shows up, we typically go to, what do I need to do to fix this problem, to resolve this conflict, okay? And I finally decided, that really shouldn't be my first question. The first question, if I want to operate in integrity, is not what do I need to do. The first question is a combination of two questions, which says, who do I need to be in relationship to this situation? Who do I need to be? And so in asking that question, I break it down into two questions. And just think about this in the context that the challenge you're facing is a challenge involving conflict with another person, okay? And so that's the situation. So the first question I'm going to ask is, what is the situation calling me to be in relationship to the problem or challenge that I'm facing? Now, if it's a conflict, and if I look at the context, am I engaging this conflict as a parent? Oh, okay, so I'm engaging my child, which means I'm being a parent in relationship to this challenge and the engagement of this conflict, which, depending on the age of my child, the nature of the problem, is going to have me deciding how I need to be. If I'm engaging this situation, with a spouse or a partner, that's a different role than being the parent. It's really hopefully more an equal partnership. If I'm in a professional environment and I'm confronting a conflict with a direct report or someone who's subordinate to me in the organization for whom I evaluate, well, that's calling me to maybe be a different role. And so I'm looking at the situation and saying, who do I need to be in this situation? And when people call me and say, hey, Greg, we want to hire you to help us resolve some conflict in the organization, I don't say, great. I say, well, who do you need me to be? Do you need me to be a mediator? Do you need me to be a facilitator? Do you need me to be a coach? Do you need me to be a teacher? Do you need me to be a consultant? Do you need me to serve as an expert? Now, each of those ways of being has a different set of expectations related to it. And so I need to know, who are you asking me to be in this situation, so that I can determine what I need to do and whether I can do that effectively at integrity. The second question is not what the situation is asking of me, but it's who am I committed to being as it relates to the situation. So the problem lands in front of me, the conflict lands in front of me. The question is, what's my level of commitment to that problem or that challenge? I often ask people in groups that I'm working with, how many of you have problems on your plate that are not yours? And almost everybody will raise their hand and say, I got a lot of problems on my plate that are not mine. I said, yeah, because you didn't ask the last question. You took on issues, in many cases, because you wanted to meet someone's expectations, but you had no commitment to doing that. And in fact, you really have no responsibility to that, and probably not the best one taking that on, but you felt it was something you needed to do. So I need to step back and say, who am I committed to being in this situation? A quick example, I was working with a university once where the dean of a college said, I want to hire you, Greg. I said, great, what do you want me to be? So I want to hire you to facilitate a strategic planning process in one of our departments. I go, yeah, okay, I can be. Who's he asked me to be? A facilitator of a strategic planning process. And he goes, oh, by the way, he said, when you're doing that, I want you to observe the department head, and I want you to give me some feedback on him. Now, in that case, who is he asking me to be? A spy, sort of a mole in the room. And I said, can I do that? Yeah, I mean, I could do that. I'm smart enough. I could serve in that function. But I had to say, I'm not committed to doing that. That is incompatible with my other role. If you want to hire me for that role, no, thank you. I would rather not take the work if you want me to do the other. Does that make sense? Because I said, I can't be facilitator at integrity while I'm spying on part of the group for somebody else. Basically, I can't do that. So those are the first two questions. Who is the situation calling me to be? Who am I committed to being? And once I can anchor myself in those commitments, then I can ask the question, okay, what am I going to do? How am I going to strategically plan what this conversation needs to look like, how I'm going to engage this, and begin to think about it. But I've got to anchor myself in this ability to operate in integrity if I want to build safety and build trust into the engagement. So let me stop there and just see, are there any questions, feedback, comments on that? Yes, at the bottom here, I don't see a name, but I see a beanie.
Is it me?
Yes, it's you, Robin. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm wondering, in the first question, what is this situation calling me to be? Is that be equal or equivalent to roles?
Yeah, you can interpret it that way.
It's not that centered sense of being. It's a role. It's a particular identity. Is that
That would be one dimension of it, but you can take it deeper to that.
okay?
I mean, I would answer that question in some case. I really want to be a manifestation of the love of God in this environment. And so, as a mediator, in some cases, I want to be the presence of peace in this space. I want to be a manifestation of hope and optimism. So I think you can, for me, you can take it to that level.
Okay.
But I think it's also it is about role. I do need to look at what is the nature of the relationship to the persons with whom I'm engaging here, and how might that need to shape how I show up and what I can commit to and maybe not commit to.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. Okay.
Hey, Greg, does that change sometimes in the course of like engaging with the conflict? Because I can imagine a situation presents itself, you think, oh, this is calling me to be this. But, as in your example with the college professor or academic you just talked about, when you really kind of get below the surface, it's really something else that's going on.
Yeah, I think that's a great, and again, it's, what was your name again, Parry?
It's Matt.
Matt, yeah, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. And I teach a class on leadership, leading through conflict and change. And we look at three roles that leaders often take in engaging conflict. One is the leader's role is just to sit down and navigate and engage the conflict as a partner. In some cases, the leader's role is to facilitate other people engaging the conflict, okay? You as a department need to figure out what you're going to do about this. And then in other cases, the leader's job is to, I say leader is arbiter, the leader's job is to come in and impose a resolution. So for example, I had a CEO of a nonprofit, a good friend of mine, who said, yeah, I had a situation like that where I had two department heads. And I basically said, I'm going to hire a mediator for you. And my hope is that you guys can resolve the issue. And you need to know that if that's not successful, I will be implementing a solution to the problem. Yeah. So she was just very transparent that said, my role may need to change. My preference is you guys take responsibility for this and address it, and I'm going to resource your ability to do that. But if you don't, your behavior is so toxic in the organization, it will stop.
Right.
Yeah. Does that make sense?
Right. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And, I often talk about that there's needs often in that context. I need to be real transparent that that may happen, that, here's my preferred option, but if option A doesn't work, we are going to go to option B, because one way or the other, the conflict has to go away because of its cost within the larger system or structure.
Sure. Yeah.
Any other comments or questions? Okay. So we're going to be looking at a basic, I just go sort of a 4-phase process for effective collaboration. And I use the word collaboration for effectively engaging conflict. These 4 phases are designed to be a very generic way of thinking strategically through the engagement of a conflict or a problem or decision-making process. So, for me, these 4 elements show up in mediation, they show up in facilitation, they show up in negotiation. I mean, they're just basically some really core ways of thinking strategically about how to engage a challenging situation or a conflict. The first phase is preparing to have the conflict. And I think I shared this with you last week. This is a significant piece that I mentioned. There's a guy named Lawrence Susskind, who's a world-renowned theorist and practitioner in negotiation. He does things like climate change negotiations. He's a brilliant guy. But he says that any effective negotiation, and you can interchange that word with just basically difficult conversation, is effectively built on 70% of your time preparing for the conversation. So we're going to spend a chunk of time on that tonight. So it's really, what do I do up front to be very intentional in preparing myself to engage the conversation with you at integrity and in an effective, optimistic way. The second phase is I just call convening the conversation, which means let's sit down and start the conversation. So we've done some preparation. I've done some preparation. Now we are sitting down, and we need to create a space. We need to create a context in which we can have the conversation. And then we need to clarify some basic expectations about what's the purpose of our conversations, what are our objectives for this conversation, what, if any, roles and responsibilities we might be bringing to this conversation. But, fundamentally, we need to clarify upfront some expectations as to what we're here to talk about and how we're committing to talk about it. So we're really beginning to create a context. Moving to the third phase, which we'll come back to more next week, is how do we really unpack what we bring on the table? How do we unpack the issues, and how do we explore and expand our shared understanding of this particular issue? And we're going to really focus, next week on how do you ask really good questions that will expand our shared understanding and move us beyond our initial assumptions and beliefs about what's going on to a deeper understanding. And then the final phase is, if necessary, do we need to take action based on what we've learned? In some cases, just increasing our shared understanding that was great, thank you, and we've sort of cleared the air, we're going to move on. But in some cases, okay, we've learned some things here that actually are calling for us to maybe do something different. What are we going to do? And how are we going to do that? We need to come up with an action plan. So that's the basic structure as to how we're going to engage in that particular situation. So we're going to spend our time, tonight really starting with preparation. And I'm hoping that that you have got in your mind a conflict and or a difficult, challenging conversation, however you want to frame that you can use, because I'm going to put you in your breakout rooms a little bit here, where you're going to apply this preparation framework to that particular scenario to determine, okay, if I take this idea of preparation and what that means and apply it to my scenario, what does it show me? What might that look like in order to prepare for the conversation? So preparation, when I talk about preparation and preparing to engage in a conflict or difficult conversation, I break preparation down into 3 elements or 3 dimensions. And this is based on a model that I was taught years ago, I think in my first early mediation training. And the model is sometimes referred to as the triangle of satisfaction, the elements of satisfaction. But basically what this model says is that when people come together to engage in a difficult conversation, to engage conflict, to engage in some sort of shared decision-making process, and often that decision-making process is through the navigation and engagement of the conflict, people are going to reflect on that experience, and they're going to assess their satisfaction with that experience against 3 dimensions. So you meet with, and you maybe have this experience. You're leaving a meeting that was maybe a heated meeting. It was there was conflict, and there was an outcome to the meeting. Maybe it was a committee, maybe it was a task force. And if you're like me, I spend time sort of reflecting on that as I'm driving home, and I'm trying to look at it. Was that worth my time, or was that kind of a waste of time? I mean, what do I feel about what we just did, the work we just did? And I'm basically going to assess my satisfaction across 3 dimensions. The first, we refer to as substantive satisfaction. And substantive satisfaction basically is, did we achieve the outcome that we were looking for? Did we accomplish what we set out to do? Do we have an agreement? Do we have a plan? Do we have better understanding? Are we looking and saying, we came together to do some work. Did we do the work? Do we have an outcome? Do we have a product? Do we have something to show for that work? That's one level of satisfaction. Or do I walk away from the conversation going, man, I thought I was confused. I am totally confused now. I have no idea what we just talked about. I have no idea what was decided. I'm not sure what we were doing. I don't know if you've raised your hand if you've had those kinds of experiences, but they show up or going, yeah, I kind of don't know. So that's one level. The second level of satisfaction is procedural satisfaction. And that really focuses on, how did we reach the agreement? How did we accomplish the work? How did we come up with the plan? Whatever. What's the process? And this is where we're asking the questions. Was that fair? Did it involve everybody? Did everybody get a chance to share their perspective? And were all voices heard and acknowledged? I mean, did we really do a thorough exploration of the issues? Or, yeah, we have an agreement and we have a plan, but it was kind of driven by 1 or 2 people. It's like they set the agenda and they drove the outcome, and yeah, we got a plan, but it didn't involve participation by everybody. Or, yeah, we have a plan because I had to totally accommodate your objective just to get away from the situation. And so I'm going, yeah, we have a plan, but it doesn't really meet my needs. And then the final dimension of preparation is emotional, psychological, relational preparation, which really focuses on, what's the nature of my relationship with the people, the person or the persons with whom I've had this difficult conversation, with whom we've engaged this conflict. Is my relationship deeper, richer, more respectful? It's like, yeah, that was a hard conversation, but man, I really feel a much deeper connection to that person. I really learned a lot from that person. I mean, that was really provided a lot of insight. Or am I walking away from the conversation going, I hope I never have to see that person again. I don't really ever want to talk to them again. That was really an awful experience. Now, for me as a facilitator of conflict engagement, I call these pulse points. I've got my pulse as we're having the conversation. I've got my pulse on these, my finger on these 3 pulse points. Are we focusing on the issues? Are we having a meaningful, substantive conversation? Is the process by which we're having the conversation, is it feeling safe? Or has it become unsafe, where the person has begun to disengage and step back? Are people feeling respected, heard, validated, acknowledged, whatever those terms are? And so I want to be sent, as a outside facilitator, I'm constantly monitoring that piece. When we're engaging with somebody else, we're having the conversation while at the same time, we're sort of processing what's happening in the conversation at these 3 levels. With the primary objective is saying, how can I, as someone who's consciously aware of being intentional, help facilitate this to be a safe, balanced, fair, conversation? And when it begins to get unsafe for some reason, where people begin to disengage, how do I bring people back? So I'm going to move on to the next phase of talking about each of these 3 areas a bit. Are there any questions about these 3 dimensions? Why they're important, why I've identified them? Anything you'd like to clarify about that?
If you think of this as a spectrum, Greg, I would imagine at one end, the ultimate, satisfaction would be to have all 3 of these met. But my guess is that in a lot of conflict situations, you have people that cleave to only one of the 3, right? I'm only interested in, satisfying, so to speak, the procedural part. That's all I care about, right?
Yeah. Or there are other people who are saying, the substantive issue is really secondary to the relationship issue. I want to make sure that when this is over, I want a wise decision, but It's really important to me that the relationship is intact, the community is intact, people are continuing to maintain that. So yeah, I think people bring different levels of that. And I want to be aware of that. And if whatever I can do to influence and increase people's satisfaction in each of those. The other piece I would put out there would be, because I'm gonna contradict myself here in just for a second here. So remember I said that, 70% of your time spent in preparation, okay? If I look at sort of the range of conflict situations in which I've been involved, either directly as a participant in that or as a support person facilitator in that, preparation for me in a difficult conversation conflict has ranged from 3 months to 3 seconds. Now, what do you mean? What do I mean by that? What was 3 months? I do a little bit of it, but I used to do a lot of facilitating contract bargaining or negotiation. And, I was doing a contract bargain where they wanted to do a more collaborative bargain. So we spent 3 months training the team on how to have a different kind of a negotiation. And we spent 3 months collecting data jointly on both teams, the administration, the management team, and the union team, gathering data that when we came to the negotiation, it was one of the most phenomenal negotiations I've ever been in because of the amount of preparation we spent getting ready to have that conversation, gathering data, learning together about how we wanted to structure this experience and what they wanted the outcome to be, not just from a contractual point of view, but relationally between union and management. The 3 second situations are those situations where I say you're blindsided. You're walking down the hall and someone says, Matt, I need to talk to you. I need to talk to you now. And you're going, whoa, I think there may be a conflict here. And I'd like to say, could you give me about a day so I can get ready to talk to you? Because I'm not sure I'm ready to talk to you right now. I may not have that opportunity. I have about 3 seconds to quickly, hopefully, if I really practice self-awareness and mindfulness, to be able to recognize I'm moving on to the defensive, take a breath, suspend judgment. Let's see what's going on here. So that's on the other continuum, I think, that shows up here. Yeah, I mean, preparation, absolutely. You've got the luxury, the ability to do it, yes. At the very minimum, I need to be preparing and building my own capacity to entering into these conversations effectively, just by developing, through the practice of mindfulness is a classic way of developing that skill, so that I can respond at integrity within 3 seconds and not need all that other time.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Other questions or comments? Is this making sense? I hope. Okay. All right. So we're going to start with me getting the screen right. Personal preparation, emotional preparation, psychological preparation. This is really preparing yourself to enter into the conversation, okay? I think I mentioned the book Crucial Conversations, and it's a book that, again, I really recommend if you want to do some reading on this particular topic. It's an outstanding book, very practical in a broad range of contexts. The authors are 4 organizational development consultants, primarily working in the private sector, but they've written the book to be very broadly applicable to a professional and personal context. It's very well researched. It's not a pop psychology book. The core author, Patterson, is deeply embedded in the research. But they call the chapter in their book for this personal preparation is entitled "Start with Your Heart," which really is sort of grounding yourself and refocusing yourself as to who you want to be in the conversation. So I'm going to put you in your breakout rooms in a couple minutes here to reflect on these questions. But in preparing myself to enter into and engage a conflict with someone else, to prepare myself, I'm going to start by asking the questions I referenced earlier as to being in integrity. Who am I committed to being in this situation? What is the situation calling me to be? And how will I align myself? So part of my personal preparation is that, engagement of those questions to assess my role and who I'm committed, what are the values and commitments that I'm bringing to this engagement. Then in the book, Crucial Conversations, they introduce some questions that I think are helpful to reflect on in preparing to have the conversation. One of their questions is, what does my current behavior tell me about what my motives are in this situation? Now, as a psychologist, we refer to this as a functional behavior analysis. It's really analyzing what's the behavior and what's the function of that behavior. And if I was to look at how have I been dealing with this conflict in the past, or how am I currently engaged in this conflict? If I'm honest, I could say, well, my behavior is telling me that I want to be right. Oh, okay. You want to be right. In some cases, and be a little vulnerable here, my behavior is telling me is I want to stick it to the other person because they've kind of ticking me off. I want a certain amount of, I want to get a little bit of revenge here, potentially. That could be the situation. I mean, this person made me look really stupid, and I don't want to, honestly, I may want to do that, okay? So I want to assess that. What is my current behavior? Because I want to say, is that in alignment with who I want to be? No. It's sort of my darker side coming out. No. So then what do I really want for myself in this situation? What do I want, not just as an interest? You could look at it from an interest perspective. What are my interests as it relates to this issue? But I really think it's more, what do I want in a relational context? I'd like to be acknowledged. I'd like to be heard. I'd like to be at least understood. I'd like to be agreed with, but that's not important. I mean, really, you don't have to agree with me, but I'd like you to at least take the time to understand me. What do I want for the other person? And if it's a parent engaging a child, I might want to see this as an opportunity for some key learning. So how am I going to use this conversation as a way of some key learning? If it's a supervisor with someone I evaluate, again, I might want to see this as an opportunity for learning. If it's a partner, someone that I am closely working with or live with, okay, what do I want? Well, I want them to be perceived as being respected and acknowledged and understood. What do I want for this relationship? Well, in some situations, there is no relationship. I mean, there's some conflicts like, I really don't need a relationship. I've had conflicts where I've had situations where I don't need a relationship. We need to resolve this issue, But in most cases, for me, it's like, I'd like the relationship to work, well, what does that look like? And then again, this is a variation on the question above. If those were my commitments, how would I behave? How would I show up in this conversation in alignment with those commitments? And you could think of other questions to get in there also, but the fundamental piece you're wanting to focus on here is, how do I prepare myself to engage in integrity? That's really what you're trying to build here. How do and I'm wanting to engage in integrity. Why? Because it's pivotal to the building of trust. It's pivotal to building and maintaining safety in the conversation, which is pivotal to our ability to have this conversation. And so this is recognizing I can't control what anyone else is going to do, but I can decide and choose who I'm going to be in this conversation and who I'm committed to being in this conversation, and anchor myself in that as I enter the conversation. So let me just stop for a moment there and see if there are any questions before I get us into our breakout sessions. Oop. Okay, give me 1 minute here then. I need to.
Greg, I have a.
Yeah, go ahead.
Wendy has a question.
Go ahead, Wendy.
It seems like the approach is the same if you have a pre-existing relationship with someone where you've had prior conflicts with versus developing a proposal to different people where you have no pre-existing relationship.
Okay, I gotta apologize, Wendy, because you were cutting in and out there, and I'm not sure if I got what you were saying.
How is it different? I'm trying to frame my question. question. How is it different if you have a pre-existing relationship with someone where you've had prior conflicts, opposed to if you want to set up a proposal to a group of people where you've never had any conflict, you've also never had any successes. It's a neutral relationship.
Okay, yeah. For me, so in the first context, you're saying we're having a conversation, there is a conflict, there's an identifiable conflict, we're coming together to engage that conflict. That's the first context. The second context is we're coming together to function as a group. There's a good possibility that we will experience conflict in that because the issues we're taking on are issues about which people have differences of opinion, they're high stakes. And so in that case, we're trying to prepare to mitigate the downside of conflict. Would that be accurate?
Exactly.
Yeah. So in that context, I teach a whole class on that, but I basically say in almost all conflict in a group context can be rooted in an unclear or unmet expectation. So when we're coming together as a group, and one of the things I say that really effective teams or groups balance what we call task with maintenance. Groups come together to do a task. We're going to plan a music festival, right? Okay, that's our task. The maintenance is how do we build the structure that will support our ability to do the work effectively? And so over the years, have identified 5 to 7 critical issues that we need to clarify expectations about at the front end before we start doing the work in order to build that. And then we also need to continue. And I'll just go through them very quickly. The first question is, what's our purpose as a group? What are we trying to accomplish here? What's the work? And is our work being driven internally by us? Is the work being externally driven by the organization, by a legislative mandate, by contractual something? But what's driving our purpose? Okay. And you can unpack that into what's our purpose for the next 6 months around the project for our 2-hour meeting today, what's our purpose for today's 2-hour meeting related to that purpose? But I can't tell you how many people they just assume we all know what the purpose is, right? The second is, what are our roles and responsibilities? So if I'm part of this group, why am I a part of the group? What do I bring to the group? When I'm speaking, am I speaking as Greg Abell individual? Or am I speaking as Greg Abell representative of my department or this constituency group or whatever, representative people I represent, so that when you hear me talk, hopefully you're not hearing me talk, you're hearing me being the voice of this larger group to make sure that their input is provided. The third conversation has to do with, it comes by different titles: ground rules, operating principles, group protocols, behavioral expectations. But those are, basically, how do we want to interact? And really it's, how are we going to have difficult conversations? When things get kind of heated here, what are we going to do? What are the norms that you're going to drive that? And those are critical. The fourth conversation I call internal structures, which says, okay, if we have to accomplish this task by such and such a date, what's that going to look like? How do we sort of reverse engineer it? How often are we going to meet? Where are we going to meet? For how long are we going to meet? How do we set agendas? How do we make decisions? Is this making sense?
Yes.
So all of it, we make decisions. I had a group, we make decisions by consensus. Well, what does that mean? People interpret that differently. The fifth conversation I call external connections. How does what we're doing get communicated out to those who are impacted out? How do we get feedback on that? So, for example, when I used to do contract bargaining, what's confidential, what's not confidential, what gets shared, what doesn't get shared. And then the last two kind of depend on the context, but I was on a project a number of years ago where we added a question about, we have to reach shared understanding of what kind of language we use. In the context there, I was working with multiple agencies who were working around children's mental health issues. Well, if you bring juvenile justice, child welfare, education, mental health together to talk about children's mental health, they all use different language. And then we have to, and the final one has to do with clarifying and operationalizing core values. So are there some core values that inform the work that we're doing as a group? And yet, what do those values mean? How do we know them? So those, I basically tell groups, you need to have those conversations when you're forming. You need to revisit those conversations somewhat on a regular basis, just to sort of align with them. And if your group is having a problem, you need to look in those 7 areas, because often it's going to show up in one of those 7 areas. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
And if you email me, I'll send you something I wrote that expands on that, if you'd like it.
I'd love it. Thank you.
Yeah, okay.
So Greg, I don't know if you'll remember this, but you started that off by saying all group conflict almost always has, and I didn't get the word.
That's the test. I'm sorry, you're not going to pass. I'm not gonna... No, I would say that a lot of group conflict, all is probably extreme. A lot of group conflict is a result of unclear or unmet expectations. And I would say, even as a mediator, almost all interpersonal conflict is at some point going to be sourced in an unclear or unmet expectation. It's just one of those things that you classically go to. Daphne, I see your hand there.
I just was going to say, you mentioned Brene Brown, and there's something that's been pretty helpful to me, just in general. When I try to prepare for any kind of situation or conversation, if I have time to think about and prepare for it, and that was her concept of the story I'm telling myself.
Yeah.
So often we enter a situation, especially one where there's conflict, with a story that we're telling ourselves. And so I have just found it really helpful to, when I get really back on my heels in some situation, to just ask myself, what is the story I'm telling myself? And how can I figure out whether that story is really accurate or not?
Yep.
I also think that, for me anyway, preparing to go into any kind of a meeting where there might be contention, I have to also acknowledge and recognize my own style and my own way of being and what happens to me. I mean, the 3-second encounter is almost always disastrous. It's just disastrous. I have personal history that would just put me back on my heels. And if you came and said, I got to talk to you in 3 seconds and, kind of calling the carpet type stuff, I would just understand that I'm not going to be at my best. I'd have to say that. I won't be at my best in that situation.
Yeah. Wendy and I have a common friend, Stephen Rufo, who has what he calls the 24-hour rule. And in those situations, he says, I just have a rule. I don't respond within 24 hours. So you're going to give me 24 hours to respond. I'm not going to go there right now. And that's just his sort of life rule that he operates with around those kinds of situations. So, okay, for some reason,
Greg, I went ahead and prepared the breakout, so I
been
would
looking
take
for
those.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So what I would like you to do is you're going to break onto the rooms, and I'd like you to think about a situation that you're involved in the context of preparation, and thinking specifically about the context of personal preparation and engaging at integrity. So I'd like you to reflect on those questions as to who you're committed to being, who you're calling to be, what would that look like? What do you want for that going forward, okay? I appreciate the questions, they're great. And I'm looking at the time here. We'll take 15 minutes. I think, yeah, we'll do fine. And we may not do a second breakout session, but I want you to have time for this conversation, okay? And be ready to come back with questions and any responses. Thank you. Comments or questions on what was that like, thinking about your situation in that context of preparing to engage at integrity? What showed up for you as maybe insight or new learning? Yeah, Connie, you're muted.
There. Okay.
Thank you.
What showed up for me is that it's really easy to get embedded in your belief about whatever it is you're going into conflict with. Like, I absolutely know this person will not listen to me, or I absolutely know, like it's really easy to just dig your heels in and say, this is it.
Or try to predict the behavior, as Connie told me, is like, you can't walk into it predicting the behavior, because then you already have a mindset, right?
Oh, yeah. And you will produce that behavior.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't thought about it that way, is that, you walk in it with the mindset of how the person's going to react. You're probably going to get that reaction.
well, and going back to what Daphne was sharing before we broke, it's that I've got the story. And once I've got a story, I am hypersensitive to evidence that will support that story. And I will often, I will reinforce that evidence when it shows up, and
That's
so.
interesting thought, is then you search for those reasons.
Yeah, see, I told you that was going to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting how that can affect the outcome. So then you are predicting the outcome, because then you just keep emphasizing on the things that you're finding.
It's bias confirmation, right?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, very much so. I think that, what was I going to say? I just lost it. That's okay. It'll come back to me.
I had the same thing happen.
What I found most helpful, I think, is that idea of focusing on what you want. And what it occurs to me, at least for me, is that sometimes I don't know what I want. I think I want a certain outcome that is, the acceptable outcome kind of thing. But underneath, I have other needs, that I'm not always in touch with, that can really skew, skew the dynamic and the conflict situation. So getting in touch with these, what you really want, and if it's not appropriate, preparing yourself so you're aware of it, and you don't let that play out, because it's going to be counter to what you want to gain in the conflict.
So Judy, you're seeing the importance of spending this time in preparation, because I'm saying if you don't know what you want, you shouldn't be going into the conversation.
Right.
I think it also points out the importance of picking your battles.
Oh, yeah.
Is this a hill I'm really willing to climb? And if it is, then I need to go through this list that you gave us of questions to prepare. And if not, perhaps you just don't engage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think at some point you do the analysis and go, in the grand scheme of things, this is not as important as I thought it was. So, and I think maybe the older we get, we're able to go there more quickly when we look at it at that point. I don't know. Carol, were you going to say something? I don't know.
About no, I'm not saying anything.
Okay, I'm sorry. I thought you were saying something. Thomas, I see your hand.
Yeah, I was wanting to get a sense that in this preparation stage, how do we go about getting information about the interests or position of the other party?
Well,
a lot of the discussion you were talking about was really articulating our own position, which is of course vital. You got to do that, and our own interests. But what about the other party? Is that part of the actual meeting?
That may be part of the actual meeting. In some cases, you know what it is because you've already had conversations. They've already expressed your position. And one of the reasons you're stuck is that they've expressed their positions. In some cases, the conversation is with someone you know, and you say, well, what do I know about this person? I mean, stepping out of my own story, what am I hunching their interests or be? What might I even infer their interest might be from the position they've stated? The point is, I don't want to go in and say, oh, I know what this is all about. I want to go in and say, I got some hunches, but I'm going to have to pursue that in the conversation. And if I don't know, I'm not going to even want to go in and say what their positions are. I'm going to go in saying, I don't know what their positions are. I'm going to go in really looking for their interest. That's where my inquiry is going to start.
Right.
Because I don't know that at this point. So I think it depends a lot on the context as to what you know, but I think at some point, part of this preparation is what do I know and what am I making what I know mean? And what do I need to step back and realize that what I'm treating as a fact is really only an assumption. And so it's doing some deeper work around that, I think.
So would you say that if you're dealing with a family member as opposed to somebody in a business world, would it be safe to say, hey, this is how I'm feeling about what's going on here? Is that my impressions correct? Or what would you recommend in terms of?
One way to say it's like, this is what I've observed. And these are the conclusions, and this is what I'm making that mean. This is how I'm feeling. And I don't know if I'm right or not.
Mm-hmm.
So one author says, when you put those interpretations out there, you want to put them out there tentatively. This is what's going on, and this is how it's affecting me. And it's obviously because you're such a doofus that you're causing me to feel, I mean, that's my favorite term. You see what I mean, though? But at some point, I'm getting the sense, but I don't know if I'm right or not.
Yeah.
And I'm open. I want to explore this with you together. Now, before we would have that conversation, we would want to set the context up that would invite us to be able to go there, which is the convening piece. So part of the preparation is, I'm just realizing that I don't know as much as I thought I knew. And so I'm going to have to go in with some curiosity. I'm going to have to go in to explore some things that I thought I was certain about that maybe I'm not so certain about. You know what I mean? So that's really why you're going through this process, to really be thinking strategically about where does this conversation maybe need to go?
Yeah.
So let me real quickly just go to the second aspect of preparation, which is substantive preparation, which I think will, again, begin to fill some of this out. So we've talked about preparing ourselves emotionally, but preparing ourselves substantively is asking questions like, what is the issue? And how you frame the issue is critical. And am I framing the issue as a problem, or am I framing the issue as an objective? I mean, how you ask that question is critical. Are we here to talk about why you're such a jerk? Or are we going to talk about how we can improve our relationship working together so that we can be more respectful of each other? I mean, they're both sort of the same question, but very different way of approaching it. What is your story? Which takes us back to what Daphne was saying. What am I bringing into this as an interpretation that in fact I'm treating as fact that I need to step back from? What are the issues? What are the interests? Which takes us back to what we talked about last session. At the bottom, I wish we had more time right now because we're running out of time. We need to assess our BATNA. I don't know if you're familiar with the term BATNA, but the BATNA is a negotiations term, and it actually came from the book Getting to Yes, where they introduced the idea of a BATNA and a WATNA. The BATNA is an acronym that stands for the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. Your best alternative to negotiation. So Thomas, I'm just going to use you because we were just talking here. So I'm sitting down to talk with Thomas to try to resolve a conflict, okay? But I also need to know, when I go into that conversation, I need to know, is the only way I can solve this conflict is if Thomas agrees with me? Because what if Thomas doesn't want to solve the problem? What if Thomas likes the problem, or Thomas says, I don't need to solve this problem? Then I need to know, well, does that mean I can't do anything? No, I need to know, do I have other options? Is there a point where I would engage with Thomas with complete, commitment to resolve this and realize this is not going to be an avenue in which I can solve the conflict? So does that mean I have to continue to operate at the effect of the conflict? Or does that mean I'm going to pursue an option? Now, when you have options, you typically don't pursue the option because it's going to cost you something, but you're saying, the cost of living I could say, well, I'm going to live with the conflict. That's okay. I can live there. Or say, I can't live with the conflict, So an example, I worked for a boss who I loved my boss, great respect, really an amazing guy to work for, but we had we came to have some fundamental disagreements about some core issues where I negotiated for 3 years with him to work through those. And finally I exercised by BATNA, which I had to quit because the cost of staying without resolving the conflict was greater for me than saying I need to go someplace else. And that cost me seniority, it cost me a number of things, cost me some great relationships. So the BATNA, sometimes going in and saying, do I have a plan B? And basically your BATNA isn't your bottom line. It's like, do I have other choices? And the more choices you have, the more power you have in engaging the conflict, because you always know that if this doesn't work, I've got options, okay? And then the final level of preparation, really just focusing on procedural, where are we gonna meet, how are we gonna meet? And the bottom one here says, there are times, and this is kind of what Wendy and I were talking about, that before you have the conversation, you're gonna have a conversation about how you have the conversation before you have the conversation. Let's create a structure that will, in some cases, I would say, let me pick on Connie. You know, Connie, you and I have been working on this issue for a long time and we've really been struggling and it just hasn't been working. So, you know, I would like to resolve this issue, but maybe we should talk about how we could have this conflict differently. Oh, excuse me, how we could have this conversation differently. And I might ask Connie, so Connie, is there something I could do that would help you to feel better about having this conversation? And Connie could come back and say, well, you can stop yelling at me all the time. And I could say, I don't yell at you, Connie. We could argue about that. Or I could say, you know, yeah, sometimes I get pretty emotional and my voice goes up. And so I'm committed to not doing that. And so Connie, I'm going to ask you that when you experience me yelling at you or raising my voice, or would you please let me know? And my commitment is I'll address that. So what do? We're creating some expectations. And I might say, Connie, there's something you could help me with. And she could say, well, I'd say, well, Connie, you know, sometimes you interrupt me before I'm done talking. You sort of talk over me. And I'm just wondering if you could avoid that because it makes me hard, you know, lose. So what are we doing? We're having a conversation to identify some things that will support us to have the conversation moving forward. Okay. And we can do that in an interpersonal context. We can do that in a team context. And so we're going to have this difficult conversation around this significant issue within our context. Before we go there, let's create the space for having that conversation. Again, with the primary objective of creating safe space to go forward. So we are right about at 8:30 and have moved fairly quickly. We didn't get to the convening piece. We'll come back to that next week. And next week, we're going to begin focusing on, you know, good listening skills. And we're also going to focus on how do you ask good questions? If we're coming together to learn together, how do you ask questions that facilitate that? So I'm going to do this. I'm going to turn it back to Kim. And if you need to drop off, feel